Hey YouTubers, I'm back with a video about my audio gear history. I don't know if that's going to be interesting to anybody, but here goes anyway. I've been into listening to music for a long time, since I was actually pretty young, and I guess, probably when I was in like 5th or 6th grade, I started getting interested in music. And started with the typical kid stuff. I was growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and started with, back in those days, kids had plastic mono record players, and I had one of those. I think it was actually a changer, so you could stack the records up on a spindle, and it would play them one after the other. I started with 2 albums. I specifically remember this. These were the 2 first albums I owned. One was Elton John's Greatest Hits, and the other one was Beethoven's Fifth Symphony on one side. I don't remember what was on the other side. I listened to the Beethoven so much that I had it memorized. I could hum every bit of it. At least, I couldn't hum every part of every bit of it, but you get the idea. When I got a little older, I got more interested in more sophisticated systems. So, when I was in high school, I basically had a series of hand-me-downs, and I spoke in another video about how I would make speakers, and I had one set of speakers that were just like based on washing machine boxes, with oval car speakers sort of attached to them. So, I was dirt poor and just sort of played around with this stuff. And anyway, so I had shitty stuff, basically, and it was hand-me-downs from my mom. When I got to college, I had one of her hand-me-downs that was actually a pretty nice, for a cheap, sort of consumer-grade receiver. It was pretty nice stuff. It was, you should look this up. It was a Panasonic RA6600 with an 8-track tape recorder and player built into it. I think it had something like 12 watts per channel, but it was well made, and it had flywheel tuning. I mean, the switches were all nice. I remember really feeling like I was doing well with that receiver. And with it, I had some kind of turntable. I don't even remember what it was. I don't even know what happened to that turntable. I cannot remember. It was some sort of direct drive thing. I don't remember even where I got it. Maybe from somebody at college or something. And while I was in college, I went from the Panasonic thrusters, which came with the Panasonic receiver. I upgraded. Well, I don't know if it was an upgrade. I changed to some Hitachi branded speakers, mostly because they looked cool and they were pretty big. And you know how it is when you're in college, you want the big stuff. And it, played loud, which is the other thing that you need when you're in college. So that was my system for 4 years, going on 5 years. And then I got my first real job after I graduated, and literally with the first real money I made, I went out and bought some audio gear. So at that point, I was in Detroit, and I bought a Yamaha A520 integrated amp. So that was my first piece of good gear. I always liked Yamaha gear, or always wanted it. I didn't have any experience with it until I bought the integrated amp. And then I also picked up my B&O turntable, my RX2 that you've seen in other videos. So that was in 86. And I had that gear for a very, very long time. It was sort of the center of the system, and other stuff kind of swapped in and out. Later on, I moved down to Tennessee. I worked for Saturn, believe it or not, in the very, very early days when the plant was being constructed. And down there, I upgraded or side graded, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I bought some Cerwin Vega bookshelf speakers that played extremely loud, and a Technique CD player, which was a piece of crap, but that's what I could afford. And I bought my first good cassette deck, which was a JVC 3-head deck, and it was a very nice deck. And it's another one of those pieces of gear. I have no idea what happened to the thing. Later on, I moved to Dallas, and all along I'm making a little more money in my profession as a programmer. So I started upgrading a little bit more. I bought a set of Boston Acoustics speakers, and I believe they were A200s. I don't really remember. I remember they were wide and not very deep. That's the main thing I remember about them. And those were pretty nice. I was pretty happy with those speakers. Everything else was the same: the Yamaha integrated amp, the turntable, and the Technic CD player. It was around that time. This was 87, 88, 89, that area. I started getting interested in home theater, and so I had some cheesy surround sound processor I bought. It was like a processor and an amp. It probably had 10 watts a channel. I don't even remember. I don't know what happened to it either. It's gone. And some really, really cheesy surround speakers. But I had surround sound. I mean, I was an early adopter of this stuff, and I had a 27-inch tube TV, which was pretty hot shit. So that was when I was single, and I got married eventually, and we bought a house. And at that point, I bought my first, I would say, not high-end, but really good stuff. So I upgraded to first a set of Carver's gear. That was when the amps were called TFM, this and that. And I bought all this stuff and brought it to the house and was going to set it up, and realized that it was reboxed. It had been returned and sold to me as new, which I don't like. It's okay if it's used, just don't tell me it's new. So I returned it, and these people were like, what? Can we give you a discount, or can we do something? I was like, no, you sold me something as new that's used. You'll not be selling me anything. So I left that place and went shopping around, and I landed on some Adcom gear. So I got an Adcom preamp and power amp, which I kept for quite a while until, and some Rock Solid speakers, which are, the company's Rock Solid, but B&W has some interest in the company. I don't even know if they still exist. Those were pretty good speakers, and I still have them upstairs in my upstairs system. Amazing sound from a really small package, and a very versatile speaker to install. You could attach it to a wall, which is what I did in our house. And I got a Velodyne subwoofer, so my first real sub, and that was a nice system in that house. So then we moved to Denver, and now I could have a dedicated listening room. So that, of course, requires new equipment. So when I got here, I set up the Yamaha and the Rock Solids and all that gear upstairs, and then set up a system downstairs. And I bought my favorite speakers that I've ever owned at that point, and those were Magnepan MMGs. They're the smallest speakers that they made at the time. You only mail ordered them. You couldn't look at them at a dealer. But I had listened to Magnepans before at dealers in Dallas, and always really wanted a set of them. So I bought the MMGs, and they're incredible. They are incredible speakers. If you ever get a chance to listen to Magnepans, don't turn it down. Check them out. They don't sound like anything you've ever heard before, other than maybe electrostatics. So I was very happy with those speakers, but they're pretty power hungry if you want to listen very loud. So my Adcom I could actually shut down with those things. And so I started shopping for amplification again, and ended up back sort of in the vintage world with a Carver C4000, I believe it is, the big preamp, and an M1.0T Carver power amp. That did well, but I was hungry for more, so I got an M1.5T, and I used that setup for a while, and I was pretty darn happy with it. I could actually shut down the Carver with those speakers. It's pretty amazing how much power they need if you really want to play loud. So then along comes home theater. And I kind of got back into this concept of having a real home theater once front projection was pretty common, pretty figured out, and becoming very popular to do home theaters, and this was like in 2004 or so. And so I did my big home theater system that's in the next room. It's got a front projection. It's a 7.1 system. I replaced my MMGs with an all PSB setup out here. You've seen my PSB floor standers. All of this gear is great. None of it sounds like those Magneplaners did. So I still miss those things. Anyway, let's see. I'm getting a little off topic. I'm looking at my list of stuff. Yeah, so, you know, the stereo gear went, and I bought all home theater gear. I bought near top of the line Denon stuff, and set that up, and that was my stereo and my home theater getup. And I've been basically happy with it. It you know, served very well. It's good gear. Then I got this urge to sort of clean up my office, and I've talked about this in another video. I actually have a lot of audio on cassette from bands I was in and that sort of thing, and home studio stuff. And I wanted to get it sort of digitized, backed up, essentially. So I needed a cassette deck, which I hadn't had in a while. So I bought the Nakamichi again. There's a video about this. And while I was hunting for the Nakamichi, I got this thing about getting a reel-to-reel deck. That's why. I don't know. It's stupid. So I had to have one. I mean, basically, you know, childhood wish fulfillment, another video. So I got the reel-to-reel deck too. And then I'm like, you know, I really hate configuring this freaking home theater receiver. It's like programming a computer, which I do, you know, for a living. I don't want to program a damn receiver. I just want to plug stuff into inputs and outputs and use switches. That's what I want to do. So that got me into, dang it, I'm going to build a stereo alongside my home theater. And so that launched me into my current resurgence in stereo audio stuff. And so, again, other videos I've shown, I bought some vintage Yamaha gear, which is beautiful and worked really well. Is that ever enough? No, it's not. You know, once you start feeding this this demon, you got to keep feeding it. So those of you who've been watching my videos lately have seen me go through lots of gear, just like I do with any hobby I get into that involves gear. I like to experiment with things, try things out, and so forth. So I've been through well, I bought the turntable. So I got the Project Experience turntable. As I mentioned, the Yamaha stuff. Then I was like, let's try going high end on used high end on the amplification. So you saw me go through the Balanced Audio Technology preamp, a Class A preamp, which I still have here, and I have finally landed on a Conrad Johnson power amplifier, the MV55, which I've talked about in other videos, and very recently got a Conrad Johnson PV14 preamp, which is convenient because it has a remote, and it's got a tube front end and a transistor back end. Anyway, so my amplification is now all Conrad Johnson, another, not childhood, but youth wish fulfillment thing. So I now have a Conrad Johnson system, which is kind of cool. And to that system, I am adding a Conrad Johnson phono preamp, the EF1, which was some time ago a stereophile Class A component. So pretty excited about that. I have a feeling it's not going to sound that different than my Project Phono Box S, but it's all in fun, isn't it? It's all about fun. It's about trying stuff. And the other thing is, don't tell anybody. Okay. Don't tell anybody. But I might get Magneplaners again. I really miss Maggies really bad. So, we'll see. All right then. Enough blabbering. I'll catch you later. Thanks for watching.